This is Bloomberg Business of Sports.
The business of sports can be intimidating or hard for a startup to break into.
We really appreciate when our owners are actually there, with us through the journey.
Teams, ours especially, have been very intentional to diversify at all levels of the company.
I think we're in the golden years for the NFL and college football.
Our demographic reach has continued to expand.
This is going to be really unlocking the streaming platform for sports fans.
Sports valuations are rising. We'll see when they peak.
You don't have to be the best in your sport to make a whole ton of money.
Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports show. We explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr.
I'm Damian Sassower.
And I'm Vanessa Perdomo.
Later, we hear from boxing promoter Todd duBoef about the resurgence of boxing around the world. Plus, Peter Sibner of Elite Prospects explains how data and statistics are changing the way NHL teams look at the draft.
Traditionally, hockey scouting was always pretty much like that Clint Eastwood movie, Trouble with a Curve, where you had basically old guys going to rink and watching hockey players forever and ever. And we've certainly seen a change in that area.
That's coming up a little bit later. First up, though, we're joined by Bloomberg Originals contributor. I've heard of this guy before. Jason Kelly. He had a sit down with the Iron Man, Cal Ripken, that we want to hear all about. But, Jason, we need to start with news out of the NBA. My goodness, man. The NBA, they have agreed to terms on a record 11-year, $76 billion, with a B, media rights deal, Jason.
It's unbelievable. I mean, I got to say, this is like the worst kept secret, obviously, in all of sports and media and business. But this has been, long awaited, long negotiated. I think you are seeing all the elements of the new media world come together in this. You've got Amazon Prime and Peacock with some exclusive games. You've got, obviously, some of the big names coming back in, and it is a huge moment for the NBA to really establish itself, not quite at NFL levels, but this is, as you say, just such a massive step up from where they were before. People are certainly taking notice.
Jason, is it fair that Luka Doncic is going to be getting paid $80 million in the 2030-31 season? I mean, this is unbelievable for the players, for the Player Association. I mean, I'm assuming they have to consider this a huge success.
Totally. I mean, and you hit the nail on the head in terms of how the math really works for these big pro sports leagues, at least at the moment. Media rights drive the compensation for the athletes at the end of the day. And the NBA, has probably done as good a job as any in terms of getting players paid. And so it's if not a one-to-one, there's a direct correlation between how much you can get paid to show your games on TV and then how much the owners can pay the player.
The interesting thing for me, Jason, is that, we've seen the finals ratings drop. We see all of this conversation still about who's going to take over the league, who's going to be the new faces when LeBron and Steph retire and all this. But this is an 11-year deal. So does that mean broadcasters just aren't worried? They don't see it as an issue?
I don't think they are. I mean, it's a great question. I don't think they are. I do think, one of the great things that we saw in this season, these finals were, I think, very exciting. While, the ratings are going to move around a bit, it did feel like it was a very, for lack of a better term, I'm going to channel our colleague Tom Keene a little bit, like a very zeitgeisty type of finals. The Celtics, winning their 18th title, that's huge. These emergent stars, a name that we've talked about on this show before, Anthony Edwards, and the Timberwolves making a pretty deep run. You look at what Ant is doing in terms of sort of capturing the imagination. That's huge. And you do have this, this new set of exciting players who are coming along. I mean, look, and you talked about LeBron moving on, but LeBron and Bronny, potentially playing together next season. I mean, that's good. That's good television, guys. So I think there's a lot to look forward to.
So, Jason, one last question here. Commissioner Silver was very, very clear of the top agenda items in recent seasons. We needed a new CBA. We needed a new media deal for the NBA. And only then could we turn our attention to expansion. So talk to us about some of the cities that are in the running here. I mean, are we really going to see some new franchises join the NBA?
I think we will undoubtedly see some. It's funny, I'm talking to you from Seattle. I'm here for the Bloomberg Green Festival, and I'm going to be talking with some sports folks. I'm going to be talking to Jim Coulter from TPG about all his climate investing. Seattle is ready to rock, guys. They want the team back. Obviously, the Supersonics were an iconic franchise for a long time. Seattle is top of the list. And then the one that everybody's talking about, I know you're going to love this, Barr, Vegas. I mean, it is the sports town of the 21st century in so many ways. The Kraken here have been successful in Seattle, but there is nothing compared in the NHL to the Golden Knights in Vegas and what they've really ignited. You obviously have the Raiders there now. You have the A's moving eventually to Vegas. And, you know, we talk about LeBron a lot. We've already mentioned him a couple times. When he retires, he said his partners at Fenway Group and he are very, very keen on getting that Vegas franchise. So I think those are the two that are most likely to happen, Damian. And the big question is going to be, how much do they go for in terms of the price tag? You know, you hear people talk about $5.5, $6 billion. What's really interesting, going back to the Celtics for a second, is we are going to have a new comp because the Celtics, as you know, are for sale. And there is speculation that we could see $5.5, $6 billion for that franchise. And I mean, these are eye-popping numbers. Just to put it in context, the Boston Celtics were bought less than 20 years ago for about $350, $360 million, and then they're going to get sold for $5.5 or $6. That's unbelievable. Unbelievable return on investment.
You know, Michael Barr, you know, Jason Kelly just made a lot of men up in Montreal really unhappy by mentioning Vegas and Seattle over those Expos, you know. So I'm just, you know, I'm going to leave it at that.
All I know is all Bug Tussle, Tennessee is all upset now, man. Shut out again. Hey, you talked to the Iron Man, Cal Ripken, and he's one of the players I've always admired. Keep his baseball card under wraps because I love the guy. Tell us a bit about the Cal Ripken interview you did.
Yeah, thanks. It was super exciting. It was funny, you know, as you guys know, I host a show with Alex Rodriguez on Bloomberg called The Deal, and he and I were talking about it just recently, and Alex told me something that I didn't know, which was that Alex, had a poster of Cal Ripken, like, on his wall growing up. I mean, so for some of the greatest players of all time and for regular schmoes like all of us, he's iconic, Cal Ripken. I mean, he really is. And, you know, one of the things that's important to remember about him, I think, is that when we go back to the mid-'90s when he was going for that streak and setting that new record and breaking Lou Gehrig's unbreakable record, he saved baseball. We were coming out of a lockout, and all eyes got to be on this guy that everyone loved. I mean, there's no one who's like, Cal Ripken, he seems like a jerk. Like, that just doesn't happen. What he's doing now, guys, which is so interesting, is he is investing heavily and with some big Wall Street names in youth sports, and specifically his Ripken baseball is now part of a massive, essentially, youth sports empire.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Jason. You know, I have a lot of, you know, experience with youth sports, and, you know, I worked with you a lot on this story. And this story, you know, it took me by so surprise. You know, when we were talking about it, we were talking about your kids, and I'm talking about my experience in the market, and I'm like thanking my parents because I'm like, what the heck did you guys do to pay for me to do all this stuff? You know, and then when I think about, I'm the 2% of kids that go through the system and actually make it to Division I. So when you're looking at that, and the number that really struck me in the piece was the 7% of families that spend over $12,000 on youth sports. What did Cal say about all of that and his, you know, vision going into that sort of a market and being taken over by private equity?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, shout out to you for your flex about just dropping your D1.
Yeah, I had to flex on myself a little bit.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like, like top 2%, you know, no big deal.
No biggie.
It is the question, VP, about youth sports, I think, is, you know, it's clearly a profitable business. It's clearly a growing business for all the reasons that you just described. it is interesting to talk to Cal, his brother Bill, and then their partners, David Blitzer and Josh Harris, well-known names to you guys who are arguably some of the most influential investors in professional sports. They do see a business case and a business necessity, to your point, Vanessa, for broader access because it is very expensive. And so in order to grow the market, they do have to figure out how to make it more affordable, more accessible. Part of what they're doing, and I talked to David Blitzer about this for this piece, they're building, fields and facilities in, closer into cities rather than in the far suburbs to give access to different people who might not have, traditionally gotten access to that. They're expanding the number of sports they're working on. So if you're not into baseball, there's snow sports. One of the terms that I love learning about, guys, that you'll like is it's not just diamond sports, but rectangle sports too. It's like, okay, well, that's kind of a good way to put it. If you're talking about football, flag football is coming on very strong, less equipment necessary for that. So I think their answer is higher access, whether that is, subsidizing some of the cost of it and also widening the offering to appeal to a broader market.
Jason, I'm on the other side of that equation here, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. I suffered through doubleheaders on Saturday and Sunday with my son in the broiling heat up here in New York, and I see the burnout. I see the risk for injury for young players. I see teenagers getting Tommy John surgery. And I want to ask you, I've been to Aberdeen. I've been to the Ripken Experience. I've seen those Wrigley and Fenway duplicates. It's awesome up there. But my goodness, the demands that parents and that that people are placing on young athletes these days. Did you ask Cal about anything about that? I mean, what are they doing to help deal with burnout, with injury, with all of that?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you guys have just asked the two big questions about this. You nailed it. And, I as a parent, I've seen a lot of the same stuff, Damian. It's interesting to talk to Cal about it because,
he lived
this is a guy who he lived it. He grew up in baseball, obviously. But, he's the first to say that, one of the ways to combat that, especially for, good athletes who are playing baseball or lacrosse or football, is to resist as much as you can the temptation toward total specialization. And now, obviously, there's a lot of pressure to do that right now, to play one sport year-round. I think, and Vanessa can weigh on this as an experienced college athlete, I think a lot of coaches, and my son's college coach would say this, they're looking for players who, are obviously very good at their chosen sport, but also have played other sports to balance them out physically, but also mentally and emotionally to be a part of a team, to maybe, try something that they're not the very best at. My son, for instance, played basketball, and he was not a starter, but, he was the star of the lacrosse team. So that's one element to it. I do think, and not to get, too woo-woo about it, Damian, but I do think one of the things that Cal Ripken and his brother and what they're trying to represent with Ripken baseball and across the broader unrivaled sports umbrella is, and Cal really does represent this, is this sort of love of the game. That at the core of it is thinking about the entire human being. And again, to point to Vanessa, it's like you can speak to this notion of what sports can do for you, even if you're not going to be a professional player, even if you're not going to be a college player. The notion of being on a team, winning and losing, taking feedback, being coachable, understanding all of those elements that, make you a good human, make you a good, candidly, successful business person. I think that is very much at the core of it. And the last thing that I would say, it's a longer answer than you were bargaining for, but the last thing that I would say about Cal is he is very conscious. He and Bill, his brother, both, very conscious that their name, the Ripken name, is arguably the most famous surname in baseball. I think we could agree. And they want to do everything they can to protect that. And so I think that is on their minds a lot as they grow at what they think is the right pace and attract the right people and understand that, for a lot of kids, this is going to be something they do as a preteen or a teen, and it's going to help shape the rest of their life, but they don't need to focus on being a professional.
I think that that's the thing that, is getting lost in this system for sure. We were talking about hyper specialization. I played 5 sports in high school. Like I can't even, and it made me a better athlete, and like you said with your son, and yes, I wasn't the best at every single one of them, but I was a goalkeeper in soccer. Every single goalkeeper in my area played basketball. Like it just made you a more well-rounded athlete. And it just doesn't make sense for that. And like you said, it makes you a well-rounded person. And I think that that's the fear that a lot of people have. And also the problem is I talked to some of my friends about this who are like putting their kids in sports now. And they're like, well, yeah, we're just going to put them in AAU. I'm like, are they good? Like, do they want to play AAU?
Right.
They're just being pushed into this. And I'm like, oh, your kid's never played before. At 11, you're going to put them in this extremely expensive thing. No, just go play sports and go love it. That's what's getting lost. And I think that that's what, the author who was in your piece was really trying to get at. She was also an athlete, but she was like, there needs to be kind of just 2 things. And I think that's what Cal was saying, right? There needs to be the love of the game. And there is those people who are going to go play professional. And this is, that path for them.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes just on that point. Damian, I think, to sort of synthesize what you guys are saying, part of it is we as parents candidly being aware of it. And I feel like for a bit of time, people are like, well, this is what you have to do. You have to spend the money, and it's all about scholarships, and it's all about this. I do think the fact that candidly we're having conversations like this, and that the coaches and the teams and the leagues are more aware of it, I hope will start to move the conversation along. Because like you said, Tommy John surgery for a sophomore in high school, I mean, that's insane.
I've got to be the luckiest dude in broadcasting. I'm working with Jason Kelly. I'm working with Div 1 Vanessa Perdomo. I'm working also with Damian Sassower, and they all get to work with Foghorn Leghorn. Thank you, man. Jason, you are the man. Thank you again. Bloomberg's Originals contributor, Jason Kelly. Speaking of that Cal Ripken interview, we want to bring you now a snippet of the latest edition of Bloomberg Originals Power Players.
Sometimes they say baseball is dying in a way. From a youth standpoint, less people are playing, but of the less people that are playing, more of them are playing more baseball.
It's a strange but true fact about youth sports. While overall participation in team sports has been declining over the last decade, the youth sports industry has actually been growing massively, reaching an estimated market value of $37.5 billion in 2022. And forecasters believe that number can double by 2030. More money to be made means more money is chasing the dream and the profits. And right at the center of the action is one of the best-known names in all of sports. He's taken his trademark grinding approach to building a youth sports empire.
The Hammer team, all right. Is it hot on that turf today?
Yeah. Talking about the Iron Man himself, Cal Ripken Jr.
I feel like the potential is greater than it's ever been. We looked at it as sort of a small business that we're trying to give kids a chance, and now the potential is limitless.
Cal has teamed up with his brother Bill to bring their shared love of the game to young ball players across the country. The Ripken's goal? Look after both the players and the parents' interests and keep them coming back by providing a major league experience.
I feel like the potential is greater than it's ever been. You have these dreams and your thoughts, and you think that you can do it, just by, putting your effort in. But it's a little more complicated than that. There is a growing need and a growing value, and it can be a much bigger business. We looked at it as sort of a small business that we're trying to give kids a chance, and now, the potential is limitless.
That's Cal Ripken speaking with Bloomberg Originals contributor Jason Kelly for the latest edition of Power Players. I'm Michael Barr with Vanessa Perdomo and Damian Sassower. Coming up next on the show, we look into how the National Hockey League is leveraging data to improve their draft picks. That is straight ahead on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. And don't forget to catch our podcast on all your podcast platforms and right here on Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr with Scarlet Food. Damian will join us just a bit later on in the show when we hear from boxing promoter Todd duBoef about the resurgence of boxing around the world.
You know, I think people forget about it once in a while. And I think that what we've seen is just getting it, you know, understanding its global appeal, which is just so compelling, getting the characters and the personalities out there, and obviously getting it, you know, on a broadly distributed network, which really helps. You know, pull it a little bit back from the paywall days and try to get it back to where the NFL and NBA and Major League Baseball sit and put it on those big networks.
That is coming up just a little later. First up, though, we're joined by Peter Sibner. He's the president of ESMG North America of Elite Prospects. They are the world's leading ice hockey information resource. Peter, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thank you very much. Such a pleasure to be here.
I want to talk about some of the surprises in this past NHL draft, but I think the biggest one to me, all of a sudden, I saw Celine Dion come out and give one of the announcements. I couldn't believe it.
Well, you know, the NHL have been, they had a pretty bad track record for a long time with not getting the A-list celebrities to any of their events, but they certainly have improved over the last few years. So nowadays, it's you never really know what to expect.
They definitely made it into a big show, right? They held it at the Sphere, which just added this extra element of showbiz that perhaps previous drafts lacked, especially because previous drafts are always in the rink. And it felt like a smaller version of the game. Talk a little bit about how much analytics was involved from your standpoint when it came to drafting the top picks.
Well, so it certainly has changed. I mean, traditionally, hockey scouting was always pretty much like that Clint Eastwood movie, Trouble with a Curve, where you had basically old guys going to rink and watching hockey players forever and ever. And we've certainly seen a change in that area. We run a pretty big scouting department ourselves. We have at any given time 15 to 20 scouts watching just about every talent in the world. And it certainly relies on way more analytics now than it did certainly 10 years ago, but even 5 years ago. So the metrics are certainly improving. The data that is available is improving and the technology is improving. So obviously now the NHL will be going to a virtual draft for the foreseeable future, at least for next year. So holding this year's draft, it's a Sphere, I think, was a really cool way to go out. And if you ask me, I think the NHL will be back to a live in-arena draft within just a couple of years.
Yeah, I want to expand on that. You're talking about a virtual draft. I mean, this goes way beyond it. To touch off what you said earlier about the late, great Bob Probert days, is like, can he beat up somebody? Okay, he's on the team. That was the metric back then. And as you said, things have changed.
They certainly have, and also the type of player they're now drafting. First of all, they know way more about the player. They have, they increase the amount of hours they study the player, and they also draft different player types because the game has changed at a rapid pace over the last few years. And size and muscle is not really just a thing anymore. It's so many component goes into becoming an A-level hockey player these days.
Yeah, shout out to the smaller players who maybe a decade or 20 years ago, it felt like they didn't have a chance, but now there's definitely a role, a place for the smaller skilled players. Can you tell me a little bit about the tools that the teams, the franchises are using now that differs from what they used, like you said, 5 years ago when analytics was certainly becoming a more important part of their scouting efforts, but it maybe has not come to dominate things the way they have now?
No, and really, I mean, the technology and the data, it was there 10 years ago. I think it's a maturation, a process of maturing within the organization. Now every NHL team have analytic personnel. They have people who can build, like we have our API where we have every hockey player in the world. And the majority of the NHL teams use it now to keep track of every hockey player that pops up on their list. So the analytics guys have a much more important seat at the table now as it relates to discussions as to what players to pick. So I think the cultural shift in that was the number one thing to happen, because quite frankly, the data has been there for a while. And it was really something that came up through social media. More and more guys started figuring in social media who turned out to be really good at predicting whether players would become successful or not. And I think the NHL teams, it took a while for them to catch on. It was a culture that needed to change. But now there's no discussion anymore that analytics plays such a big role in terms of building a successful franchise.
That's so interesting, hearing about the feedback from hockey fans online, especially on social media, helping to inform what the franchises do themselves. Can you talk a little bit about the data that you provide? Is it just raw data and the teams then take that raw data and create their own algorithms in terms of weighting which skills or which metrics they want to highlight? Or is that something that you'll do for them and you'll package it according to each team's needs?
Well, we do it to a certain extent because we put out a draft guide every year. This year, I believe it was 1,400 pages, and we had somewhere in the vicinity of 400 players in that draft guide. So we do provide a lot of detailed content on the players that are likely to go in the draft. But as far as our raw data, the API, it's basically we have close to 1.1 million hockey players in our database. Obviously, a bunch of them are retired. But we start tracking players in North America from age 13, in Europe from age 14, 15. So when the NHL clubs start looking at players, usually around 15, that player will always be in our database. So they can pick up our data and use it to power whatever talent management applications they choose. So one part of that is the draft. Through our data, they can keep track of 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds all over the world. But they can also use it to track players that they have already drafted or free agents that they're looking to sign, and also run various comparables. So we don't really know between the 25 plus NHL teams that are using our data. I'm not really sure from club to club how they actually use it, but they certainly use it to power all sorts of talent management applications.
You got to give a shout out to how the whole thing started. You have about 6 million monthly users now, but this whole thing started from a college dorm room. Can you take us from how it grew from that to what we have today?
Yeah, it's quite the story. We actually will celebrate 25 years later this year, I believe in December. And Johan Nilsson, a high school student in Sweden at the time, he is still with us. He is still our database manager. He's still running day-to-day operations with everything that goes into our database. So he's still working his dream job 25 years later. It started as a website covering Swedish junior prospects, writing about them in English.
That's very specific.
Yeah, very, very specific. There was no such thing at the time, and he was dabbling with HTML programming and put out this website. And after a while, it just kind of snowballed because a lot of prospects, fans started following, because he was the number one prospect guy coming out of Sweden at the time. And all of a sudden, he started putting in statistics on all these players. And then he started covering talents from other places in Europe. And they kept adding more and more statistics. And kind of around 2005, 2006, it became more a statistics database than straight up prospects coverage. And since then, it has basically just snowballed. When I joined the company 12 years ago, I think we had like 200,000 unique visitors a week. Now we have 1.6 million a week, about 6 million users, 50 million page views a month. It has just snowballed because the hockey community has caught on.
One thing that we should mention, as much as NHL teams use the company's data, the consumer aspect of your business is what's currently driving the company's growth. Can you talk a little bit about which consumers are using your data and in what way? Is it a case of young players maybe playing junior hockey or they consider themselves prospects, signing up for premium accounts and wanting to make sure that all their statistics are available to anyone who is interested, whether it's a university or a minor league team or anything else?
It's a little bit of everything because our key target groups would basically be hockey fans and active players as of right now. As it relates to our traffic and who signs up for our premium subscriptions, it's about 50-50 roughly nowadays, I can say. Traditionally, it was all hockey fans, but since we started adding more and more features for active players about 5-6 years ago, that is our number one fastest growing target audience right now, active players. So
at any level.
Right now, at any level. And right now we're talking about two things when it comes to elite prospects. We want to be the gateway to hockey. So we want to be a platform where anyone can go and find whatever you need about hockey, kind of like the Wikipedia or the IMDb of hockey. But really the LinkedIn component is something that has grown tremendously over the last few years. And we've had 1,000% growth in the company over the past 7 years, pretty much, for elite prospects. And the majority of our new users would be active players. So we're working with the gateway to hockey and also the online showcase, where we allow aspiring young hockey players to take control of their online persona. And that's where the LinkedIn component sort of comes in.
That's Peter Sibner, the president of ESMG North America of Elite Prospects. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure, guys.
Coming up next on the show, we're talking about the resurgence of professional boxing with promoter Todd duBoef.
In all of sports, people go to the Olympics as the pinnacle. It is, I'm getting gold for my country, and this is it. I'm on the Wheaties box and everything. In boxing, it's like they go to the Olympics and their careers begin right after it. You become Sugar Ray Leonard or George Foreman or Muhammad Ali or Andre Ward or Floyd Mayweather, but it's the beginning. It's the foundation.
That's straight ahead on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. And don't forget to catch our podcast on all your podcast platforms and right here on Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports show, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr.
I'm Vanessa Perdomo.
And I'm Damian Sassower.
Joining us now is Todd duBoef, the president of boxing promotion Top Rank. My man, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports, and let's talk boxing, baby. It's coming back. I hate to put it in this term. As an old man, I'm glad. We talked about this before when you were on. You know, the Muhammad Ali days and the Ernie Shaver days and all of that, and even the Sonny Liston days, it's coming back.
Absolutely. It's I think people forget about it once in a while. And I think that what we've seen is just getting it, understanding its global appeal, which is just so compelling, getting the characters and the personalities out there, and obviously getting it on a broadly distributed network, which really helps. Pull it a little bit back from the paywall days and try to get it back to where the NFL and NBA and Major League Baseball sit and put it on those big networks.
We got to talk Olympics here. It's almost time. And, there's word that, boxing might not hold a special place in the hearts and souls of the IOC for much longer. Talk to us a little bit about boxing's future in the Olympics. I mean, is it really in doubt? I mean, this is a sport that's been, I think, a part of every games with the exception of one since 1904. Talk to us about that.
This is a little bit of a dicey one because it has been the foundation of the sport. It has been the foundation of our heroes, our global heroes all over the world. I always say this, and it's kind of an interesting way to look at it. In all of sports, people go to the Olympics as the pinnacle. It is, I'm getting gold for my country, and this is it. I'm on the Wheaties box and everything. In boxing, it's like they go to the Olympics and their careers begin right after it. You become Sugar Ray Leonard or George Foreman or Muhammad Ali or Andre Ward or Floyd Mayweather, but it's the beginning. It's the foundation. So are there some issues that really scare us as people that are in the business on a global basis? Absolutely. But I can't tell you what's going on because I really don't know enough about it. but we want to support a really strong amateur system and keep it in the Olympics as long as possible, because it's been a wonderful, wonderful foundation for us.
And how do you think, something like that would affect the overall professionalism of boxing if that amateur track was taken away, and if it's not seen as this, incredible Olympic sport? Now you have these new sports coming in and taking away all of this like speed climbing and things like that, taking away some of the headlines. But what would happen, do you think, if that was taken away?
Well, I think what would happen is you would just get these kids that are in amateur programs becoming professional much earlier. We have young kids like an Abdullah Mason or Xander Zayas that were U.S. kids that came out, and Zayas being from Puerto Rico, that decided to go pro at 17 years old, right? Julio Cesar Chavez from Mexico, because they didn't have a big amateur system, went pro much younger. And I think that's all that you would see is them turn into the professional ranks way before that arc of maybe 19 or 20 or 21, like we've seen in the past.
Let's talk about now. We got some Saudi money that is looking like it's going to come into creating its own boxing league. That's according to a story out of Reuters. Can you tell us more about that?
I think the last time we were on the show, we talked about what the Saudis' investment was, largely being housing and bringing and hosting big events to bring to the country as a place to draw attractions, tourism, interest in the country, their whole 2030 vision plan. I think that they see opportunity in the sport that obviously we are talking about and we've seen, for many years, and we've talked about, and you even said, Michael, it's coming back, it's coming back. They see opportunity in golf. They understand that they're invested in Formula One, having it there, and WWE, and now UFC is there. So I think it's too early to call, right? I think there's been some rumblings for a while, but it's too early to say where they're going to play on this.
How are you preparing for the Saudis' entry into the sport?
I mean, I think we're preparing by working with them and having a good relationship. And, we brought Fury and Usyk with them and did that in Riyadh. And then we were coming right back with Beterbiev and Bivol that unfortunately got postponed, and it's going to now move to October, which is an amazing event. So I think you work hand in hand with them. I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I don't think it's like it's all or nothing. I think it's how do you embrace a big sport? I mean, I always say this, look at boxing more like the global nature of soccer. You have the Bundesliga, right? You have La Liga, you have the MLS, you have, the Premier League. You have all these countries that have this incredible soccer product. And it's very similar to how boxing is. It's all over the world. I mean, in a way, I'm sitting ringside in 55,000 people in the Tokyo Dome in May, and 1 week later, I'm in Perth, Australia with Lomachenko and Kambosos, and a week later in Riyadh with Fury and Usyk. It's amazing how big and expansive this sport is.
So do you think that if they came in, stepped in, created this league, brought everyone in under the same entity, the same umbrella, and they housed it in Saudi, does it take away that global aspect?
I think there's two paths, right? It's if you go back in history, if you look at how Las Vegas created its identity, right? I look at that as step one, and that's what they're doing right now. Bringing big entertainment, music, big events to the region, right? And to draw attention. Step two would be, what is there if there's a infrastructural change that they would make to the sport and invest in doing to the sport? Step two, too early to tell. Step one, they're executing on a great plan, making big fights happen. So that's what I kind of see as like the real objective right in front of us.
So two of boxing's best fighters, Terrence Crawford and Shakur Stevenson, have been free agents, and Stevenson has been lighting up social of late. I'm sure you're aware of this. Talk to us about why Top Rank might not be making as much of an effort to retain them.
We sign these kids, these athletes at a young age. We develop them, and we have a long run with them. And nothing is forever. We see this more and more in other sports as well. And you can't just project out like, oh, once you sign on, you're there forever. As long as people live up to the obligations and live up to their contracts and are respectful, right? You have a free choice to do whatever you want to do with your career. I don't want to speak for either Terrence or Shakur, because I think they speak for themselves very vocally in social media. And I'm not going to try to hit that one.
No, but but isn't that part of their job? In order, you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, right? It's about it's about having a voice, right?
I think a part of it is, but I also think a part of it is your perform. I think the bigger part is what you deliver in the ring. But at the end of the day, in boxing, it's entertainment as well, and that has always become a massive component to how somebody gets fights and what their pay is. Because if you're entertaining the world, people are going to light it up and they're going to pay for you. That doesn't necessarily mean like if you're doing 30 points and 10 rebounds and 4 assists. You don't have to be the most engaging person, but your statistics get you paid. So I think you have to look at both ability and marketability, and that resonates more than anything in boxing.
Todd, and I'll be honest, I was not going to bring this up at first, but as we continue on and we talked about it off mic, I am going to bring up the topic just for the simple fact of mental health and substance abuse. Ryan Garcia, the WBC has permanently barred him, at least for now, because of just awful words that he used. I'm not even going to get into it. Anybody wants to find out about it, look it up, but it was racially charged. I bring it up from the fact that what does this say about the 25-year-old boxer and the battle with mental health and substance abuse?
I think we all sit on the sidelines speculating, right? We all sit there guessing. We all sit there going, what's next? I think any acts of harmful, discriminatory comments, there is no place for. I also think that there's a place that we all got engaged by him and his behavior of letting everybody into his world as he carried on as a personality from 5 years ago, 8 years ago, when he was hitting speed bags everywhere. He let everybody into their life and he connected to people. I also believe that it went too far. And that's a really hard balance. I don't know his personal health. People talk about mental health and substance abuses and things like that. It would only be speculation. I think he did say very recently that he's going to go into rehab. We wish him a speedy recovery, but there is no place for just atrocious comments and behavior. That is not a place in sports and not a fair place in society.
I can't leave it on that grim of a note because I'm going to now talk about something that everybody wants to talk about. The top 3 boxers ever in the history of the sport. And you try to bring this up to somebody and everybody's going to be throwing popcorn at each other. So I'm going to ask you, the top 3 fighters ever in the history of the sport.
I think it's so subjective. It's so hard to say what Muhammad Ali meant to the world and what he did in the sport. How could you not say that, right? That he's one of the great 3 fighters of all times. It's hard when you look at Sugar Ray Robinson's record and what he did and his skill sets to say he's not one of the top of the 3. But I say this not because I'm saying they're one of the greatest of all times, but I'm telling you and your audience, one of the best fighters I've ever seen in 30 years comes from Japan, and that's Inoue. I've never seen anybody like this. Power, speed in both hands, IQ, defense, offense, and he goes for the kill. He goes to take your head off. One of the most exciting fighters I've ever seen.
Wow.
So I'm not saying he's one of the 3 greatest, but he's in modern day one of the best I've ever seen in 30 years.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I accept that.
It's a hot take, but I like it.
He is a highlight reel of excitement. But it is so subjective. Remember that. It is so subjective.
It is.
And, I know people that tell me they think Floyd Mayweather is, but it's what your eye likes. I've always liked a knockout guy. I've always liked a guy that's aggressive, not appreciate as much of the defensive fighter for my eye, but I understand people that do appreciate them.
Todd duBoef, president, Top Rank. Las Vegas-based Top Rank stands as the country's premier boxing promotions company. And for one reason, because they take care of their fighters and their fans. I wanted to get that in there. Todd duBoef, thank you for joining us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thank you guys a lot. Love being on.
This has been the Bloomberg Business of Sports show, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr.
I am Damian Sassower.
Stay with us. Today's top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now.